All right, it looks like we are live. A couple of people in the room already. So good morning and welcome. As you enter the session, please let us know your role and organization. Once we see a couple of those coming in, we'll know that we are in fact live. Should see a sticky note up towards the top of your screen. Let's see. Okay, Kate, thank you very much. So it looks like we are live. So good morning and welcome to another HR Indaba Network webinar. We are very excited to have you all here today. There's been a lot of excitement and anticipation around the session, and one that's been super relevant as well. A lot of the HR community who follow some of the other stuff that we're doing with the weekly CHRO community conversations, and some of you who attended the HR Indaba last week will know that one of the key talking points was all about, are we going to go back to the office or not? When we do, what are the implications? And in the build-up to this webinar, Rob mentioned something which I thought was quite entertaining, and he said, you know, are we currently living at work or are we working from home? And the reality is it's a bit of a hybrid and a combination of the two. And we know that at the moment there's lots of unanswered questions and quite a bit of uncertainty around this. So we've invited in some guest speakers today who are going to assist us in sharing a little bit of tips and insights from their journey, firstly. And then secondly, give us some pointers in terms of how we can achieve this and do this more effectively. So an organization who's been a very long-standing friend of both the CFO and CHRO community is Oracle. And they'll be sharing some tips and suggestions in terms of how they are mitigating or managing their getting back to work strategy. And most importantly, they'll be sharing some tips in terms of how they've been empowering and assisting other organizations in getting back to work as well. So at this point, Queen and Rob, I'd like to invite you to come on camera real quick, please. We'll also be hearing from Veldsman, and Dita over at Momentum Metropolitan Holdings has also had a very interesting journey being classed as essential services. They also had a very interesting transition on the way back to work. So let's get into some official introductions. So to my left, we've got Queen Mokonoto, who is the HR director at Oracle South Africa. She's been working in HR roles for well over 22 years. So we're definitely going to be leaning on Queen for some of her insights, tips, and suggestions. We're also joined by Rob Otmar, who's the Master Principal Consultant over at Oracle. He leads a team of professionals there, and they help several organizations across South Africa transition and ensure they get back to work smoother and easier as well. Rob will be sharing some of his tips and insights from his experience working in both the HR and tech space for well over 20 years. And then we've got Dita Veldsman, who's the Group Human Capital Executive over at Momentum Metropolitan. So good morning to the three of you. Welcome to the session and thanks for being here.
Morning, John. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone.
Perfect. Excellent. So Queen and Rob, I'm going to ask you to jump off camera just for a moment. I'd like to kick things off with you, Dita. We obviously had a pre-conversation about your journey, but perhaps before we get into the Metropolitan and Momentum story, maybe you could just give us a little bit of your background. I mean, when I look over at your LinkedIn profile, I can see that you are involved in organizational effectiveness. You're a chief scientist, a business expansion head, senior researcher. You've been involved in several keynote presentations, and you're still studying at the moment as well. So just give us a little bit of insight into your journey and how you got to where you are today, please.
No, thank you so much, John, and good morning to Rob and Queen and the rest of the participants on the call this morning. I think it's a great privilege to be with you and just share some of our thoughts from a Momentum Metropolitan point of view. So I think, John, in answer to your question, by trade, I'm an organizational psychologist. So I think all that means in my world is I'm fascinated by human behavior. And I started my career in the banking industry, really looking at the impact of big technology changes on human behavior. So very much in the change management, business transformation, organizational development space. After which I shifted and focused and spent some time as a consultant. So first consulting with a formalized company at that particular stage, and after that also shifting towards doing it first independently in my own capacity, and then later time actually joining forces with a few other colleagues, and we set up a human capital niche consulting business. And by the time I'd left, we'd grown it to a business of 15 full-time human capital consultants. On my side, specializing a lot in organizational architecture and organizational design. And also, I think, having the privilege at that stage to work in the international domain, so across Africa, in Europe, as well as in Asia at that particular stage. I think you've mentioned, I think at heart, I am, the nerd in the kitchen that likes to look at what is it actually telling us in terms of theory and, the academic side of things. So I've been very involved in academia, and I still do so in a part-time capacity. But at that stage, myself and a colleague actually set up, and I played the chief scientist role at that stage, an employee engagement technology platform business, which we utilized to say, if you want to scale these things, you need to be able to do them through the different means and different channels and different avenues that we need to look at. Yeah. I think post that, just from a career point of view, to maybe get to how did I find my feet at Momentum Metropolitan, I think it was a shift, towards firstly working a lot in the merger and acquisition space from a people perspective post my time with our own tech business. And then for the past 3 years, having joined the Momentum Metropolitan Group, first in the capacity of the group executive for people and organizational effectiveness. And in the last year or so, in an acting capacity, also looking after the group human capital executive role. So I think a bit of a non-traditional path. So being involved in quite a few things. And I think as long as you're learning and you're interested in what you're doing, I think then it's good.
Definitely. You mentioned something earlier around employee engagement, and I'm sure there must be massive factors that impact that at the moment, where we are kind of in this weird transition, and some of us working from home, some of us going to the office. Are we staying at the office? Are we staying at work? Or are we staying at home? Or are we going back to the office? So maybe we can touch on some of those points a little bit later. But when we first spoke initially and we're preparing for this, you mentioned that Momentum Metropolitan obviously find yourselves in, I don't know, what's the way of underplaying this, a tricky situation at the beginning of lockdown, because you guys are essential services, and within a couple of hours or days, you needed to come up with a strategy and a plan in terms of how you were going to get people either back to work or not back to work, rather give them the ability to work. What resources were you going to be able to give them? Just share with us some of that journey, please.
Sure, John. So I think, the first thing that I think we had to do at that particular stage, and was a conversation that we had and we formed a COVID crisis steering committee that had representation from across the business and different executives sitting around the table. I think the first thing that we did is we agreed on 2 principles in terms of the way that we wanted to handle the pandemic from an organizational point of view. And the first one was really around safety. So firstly, yes, the physical safety of our employees at that particular stage. And as you've rightfully mentioned, our workforce of about 16,000 people. How do we set them up to work remotely as much as possible and as quickly as possible? And then also on the other side, being essential services, there were a few employees that still had to come into the office environment. And I think the number that I can quote there, I think after the first 2 weeks or so, we had about 60 people that couldn't work remotely, or who were not set up to be able to work remotely at that particular stage. The second thing that we spoke about then from a safety point of view is psychological safety. Yeah. It's a time of extreme turmoil for our employees, and how do we create transparent messages for them so that they know what our thinking is as an organization, and also what the impact of COVID is really going to be on us as a business. I think we saw in the market quite a few companies going under literally in 24 hours. We saw quite a lot of pessimism in the market at that stage around, will we be able to weather the storm? And I think we then had a principle in place to say that regardless of what happens, we will keep as many people employed for as long as possible. And I think that was a very strong guiding principle, which then played into the second part, which was around business continuity. And to your point, there were a few phases there, and maybe just to touch on 1 or 2 of those, there was a very real practical first phase. How do people connect from home? How are we going to make sure that they know what is expected of them? And it's almost, that helping the transition for employees, and you spoke about engagement, I think the challenges were so unique at that stage. Firstly, all of a sudden, My wife often teases me. She says she never realized I should have been in radio because it sounds like I'm a radio presenter for half of the day. Because all of a sudden we're in the same workspace and, kids around the house and all those types of things. So that element of helping people to understand what does work now look like and being able to work and being able to collaborate whilst in a very remote environment. And then also, I think, the mental well-being stuff at that stage, how do you set boundaries? Because we found in our workforce, at least at that stage, people starting to work harder. There was almost the sense of, I need to prove my existence. It's so uncertain out there. I need to prove that I add value. And for the long term, that leads to big risks around burnout and things like that. So I think it was an interesting transition for us at the beginning stage, as well as then making sure, that how do we also amend and adapt and being extremely honest where we didn't have the answers. I spoke to quite a few colleagues and I connected, broader than just our own organization, just to sense check some of our thinking. But I think it was important to be open with employees to say, yes, this is a challenge. We are working on it. We are aware of it. But no, there's no perfect answer. And we will grow with you and let you know as we move through that particular process. So I think quite a big, steep learning curve, but I think one that I think we've learned a lot of very valuable lessons from in hindsight.
Yeah, definitely. I think just looking at the number of employees that you have, and after only a few days, being able to get everybody kind of with the capacity or ability to work from home is definitely something quite incredible. So well done for that. You touched on psychological safety, which is another topic that I'd like to park for a little bit later. But at this current moment, I'm interested to hear from the rest of our audience. So you'll see a poll appear on the screen now. And you're welcome to answer this question as well, Dieter. You can answer verbally. So what percentage of your workforce have returned to the office? You can go ahead, let's publish, and then you might be able to see it. There we go. And while we're waiting for a couple of responses to come in there, please keep the chat going. Any specific questions you have for Dieter, Queen, or Rob, keep them coming in, and we'll be sure to address as many of them as we can here today. Any questions that we can't answer in today's specific session, we'll be sure to email you a direct response after the webinar as well. Okay, so I can see, wow, those dials are moving up and down. We'll give you a couple more seconds. So Dieter, tell us what percentage of your workforce are currently back in the office?
So I think, John, we're in that first category, probably between 20 and 25%. As we progress through lockdown or the different lockdown levels, I think an important thing that we've spoken about there is, and you also asked the question, why do people need to come back? And I think those answers for us, were very surprising, because I'm also going to make the statement that it's not the same 20 to 25% that are in the office every single day. And we're finding at the moment that two reasons why people need to come back, or some people need to come back some of the time, if I can almost put it that way. The first one is there is some concerns pertaining to the fact, and how we amend and adjust in terms of from a productivity point of view. So there are certain people that say, for me to be productive, these are the things that I need, and these are the things I need to think about. And the second one, we are social beings. I think we've got the saying, especially in our group human capital team, that we talk about think human first. And there's an element of that social connection that people want to remember and be reminded from time to time why this is a great place to work. And we're finding a lot more of the people coming in, obviously under strict protocols, etc. But how do we still engineer and create that social connection? But at the moment, 20 to 25%, I think, of our people do come in. There's a few operational environments that do come in a little bit more frequently than others. But we are starting to see, almost that hybrid balance between the flexibility that we want to provide for people going forward.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dieter. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, which I thought was quite interesting, you said that when you were addressing employees' concerns, sometimes you had the answers, sometimes you didn't. And I think just one of the values or the skills that's been incredibly underplayed or undervalued during this crazy time has just been that over communication, if anything, and just providing people with the clarity that they kind of need. So you spoke a little bit about what were your exact words? I think it was social engineering, or engineering social gatherings rather. So how are you currently doing that in a hybrid model? Because there's a lot to be said for those very informal discussions when we're walking down the corridor, or I come and knock on your door and have a quick informal chat with you, or we bump into each other in the restaurant. How do we facilitate that when we've got this hybrid team running?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I think it's one that we are still grappling with, and I think exploring as well. What we have done and seen in the interim, John, I think, there's been a lot of talk on our side around intentional connection. We often take for granted in an office environment, the examples that you've just mentioned. I quickly grab a cup of coffee with you. And it's possible to do those things virtually, but you have to change your mindset and be a lot more intentional about it. I can use an example out of my own team. So we've got time on a Friday morning between 9 and 9:30. You're not allowed to talk about work, but you have to be online. And we actually just, have different topics. We've played quizzes. We've done, meet the family type of sessions, because, if I hear your dog barking in the background all of the time in a meeting, I'd love to meet, him or her at some stage as well. And I think that's an example of new rhythms and routines that we need to find. I think a big principle for us as an organization is inclusivity. How do we connect people anywhere, anytime, to feel like they are part of the organization, part of the team, whether it's physical presence, whether it's virtual presence, and how do we make sure that we get their voices heard? And I think that's been a combination of utilizing technology on the one side to connect people to each other, but also helping people understand that they have to also take ownership for themselves around the connection to the organization. We can provide the guardrails, we can provide the avenue, but ultimately the employee also has to bring to the table the willingness and the intent to be part of something bigger. And I think that's been a big shift, and something we found, and I think a lot of organizations found as well, in dealing with this crisis. I think, that first initial piece, a lot of people felt disempowered around the decisions that they were able to make. I can't leave my house because there's a lockdown. I can't do this anymore. I can't see my friends and family. And we were very careful in our dealing of the crisis from an organizational point of view, not to breed learned helplessness in our workforce. How do you empower people to still make the decision themselves? So to your point, connecting to our particular culture, yes, we've got a responsibility as an organization and from a leadership point of view to do so. But there's also a responsibility from an employee to come to the table and say, this is how I'm going to be involved, how I'm going to contribute. And I think that's been a fundamental learning for us, that looks different. Other side of the equation, maybe just to mention that, I think we had to learn to have a little bit of fun as well, whilst not being together. I found that we became very serious very quickly. We dial into these meetings, it's all of a sudden, I just have an hour and I jump between Teams calls or Zoom calls, etc. I think we had to learn to say, pause a little bit. The human connection is just as important as the hour meeting where you've got certain business objectives and certain business outcomes to meet. And I think it's finding that balance whilst respecting boundaries, because we started also figuring out, that people did not disconnect, which is not great for us as an employer. We want people to be well rested, find meaning in the work that they do. And then instilling those rhythms that allow us almost to bring the things that are important to us to life in this hybrid world around those different elements. And I think that's an important thing. We're still figuring it out, we're still learning, but we have to be intentional about social connection. Otherwise, we'll have a very lonely workforce that doesn't feel the purpose of the organization every day.
Yeah, this also might still be a bit of a grey area with only 20 to 25% of your staff back at work. I know that when we've spoken with various other HR directors and CHROs, they've also spoken about how now that we're working from home, our job descriptions or KPIs or responsibilities obviously not exactly as they were when we're in the office. And you spoke to this earlier where you said, some people feel the need to overextend themselves and work these extra long hours to make sure that their presence is known or kind of felt in the office. So I'm interested to hear if and how you've adapted job descriptions, KPIs, or even performance metrics during that time.
I think that's a very interesting question, because I think if you get to the heart of what is a job description trying to accomplish, it's just trying to put the guardrails around almost in place to be able to say that this is what is expected out of this particular role. I think that's the key thing that we've tried to do. Are people clear on what we expect from them, regardless of what the job description says? Are they absolutely clear on what does good look like, and how can we equip and enable them to be able to get this? So I think the conversation has shifted a lot towards what is the outcome as opposed to the output that we are looking for, and how are we going to evaluate that going forward. But ultimately, something that we encourage is every employee should be able to answer positively around the question pertaining to, do you know what is expected of you? I think what we have seen in the virtual environment is leaders need to check in a lot more frequently. And leaders need to be absolutely crystal clear around communication, because I think the more digitally advanced we get, we start struggling with being clear in the way that we communicate. So we assume that people know. We give these broad, fuzzy type of views around what people should be doing. And I think this has taught us, firstly, be a little bit clearer, connect a bit more frequently so that people know what is expected and what does success look like, what is the why behind it, why are we doing this, and what do we want to achieve. But also for employees to also, manage upwards, ask. If you don't know, go and ask and make sure that you find out. Because in this virtual environment, if you're not crystal clear around what that looks like, we start finding, that it's difficult for people to come to the table with what they need to deliver.
Sure. I think that approach also just gives the employees a lot more trust. Excuse me, because they've been given trust to kind of make decisions on their own, or I guess it's like a sense of empowerment as well. So they must also drive and lead productivity, motivation, employee engagement as well.
And I agree with that. I think you've used a very important word, the word of trust. How do you lead people with trust if you can't see them every day? And I think that's a fundamental thing for every leader and manager to grapple with. How do I also make sure that even though I'm not with my people, they know I'm there to support them? And, how does it look differently? Because your earlier point, I can no longer just get up, walk to the desk and quickly just look over your shoulder and say, how are you doing? I can see you are a little bit down today. Yeah. And it is then about how do we help our managers and leaders adapt to that? Because if employees don't feel trusted and they are not with us in the environment, I think that leads to counterproductive behavior. That doesn't lead towards enabling and an empowering workforce. But trust is a two-way street. So I think there's elements around the fact to say, this is what we expect. This is what you expect from us as an employer, and how we bring those worlds together. And almost what does that social contract look like in terms of what work is going to entail going forward. And that can only exist with trust. And I think, and I say this tongue in cheek, I think, some of the more seasoned, call them managers, leaders, battled a little bit with that. It's very counterintuitive, this letting go component, not always to be there, not always to be visible, not always to be present. Yeah. But I think it's more about that meaningful interaction, that meaningful connection. What's the stuff that really matters? Personally, I've been trying, to connect a bit more from a personal intention point of view with some of my own employees. The things that we take for granted to remember. You were going through this difficult time. It's important to ask that question when you then connect. And it's important to, regardless of whether you're back-to-back and triple booked, in that first 2 or 3 minutes when you connect with somebody, is just to say, the first question should always be, how are you, before you start with the sentence, we are here today too. Yeah. And that's an important shift for a manager to learn in this virtual world.
And you've spoken a lot about being intentional today. So how would you go about that process? Do you block out time on your calendar to phone an individual, or do you write a to-do list with, I'll speak to these sort of 5 people today? How do you personally do it?
So I think, for me, again, it comes back to rhythm and routine. So we intentionally also, just from a well-being point of view, what we've implemented in the different business units is the opportunity not to be online and actually just to get stuff done. So for example, in my own Group Human Capital direct reports team, we don't do meetings on a Friday afternoon after 2, and we don't do meetings on a Monday morning before 10. And the rationale behind that is so people have the opportunity to wrap up the week in a good way, plan for the week ahead, and not feel so overwhelmed as part of that. In terms of the personal connection, I think it's something that I try to do by frequent interaction. So we check in a lot more frequently. And I try to balance that, with the team being together, but also with the one-on-one interactions, and just making sure that people do understand, and I think that social connection, and understand that you are there. I might not be physically there, but I am still there to be able to support. And I'm still there, but you also have to take, the accountability to reach out when you need help. And just balancing that and finding a bit more of a new routine in it. Perfect.
Dieter, one of the other things you mentioned earlier was obviously what enabled this journey was some of the technology that you're using. So I don't know if you could expand on that, share some tips or pointers with the rest of the HR community here today.
I think definitely, I think we were very worried about the fact that how do people create and collaborate when they're not in the same room? I think as HC or HR practitioners, I think we love that energy you get in a room, when people are busy with sticky boards and putting things up as part of that. So technology has definitely played, a key role for us maybe in 3 ways. I think the first one is, how do we use technology to keep people safe? So we implemented quite an extensive, screening process for people to understand their own risks. And that also then points them towards, wellbeing material and things that they can educate themselves. Because we also said, with any global news story, half of what you read is fake news, 15% is uninformed, and the rest of it you should probably trust and know about. So how do we create something that keeps employees safe from a tech point of view? So obviously we did a lot of work through our own mobile channels in terms of that, and we call it the passport process. How do you get a passport to be able to return to work, and how do we support you in that? I think the second one was around, how do we physically work together? And I think, we've always in the agile way of work spoken about work needs to be visible. And I think that led, to a lot of these whiteboards being put up around office spaces with, almost the columns of doing, done, backlog, and all those types of components. So how do we transfer and translate that into the virtual world so that people still know, where we are and how we're tracking? And we utilized a lot of collaboration tools for that in the organization to create some visibility. And then I think the last thing was really also a question around, do people know? And I think this is one that we are still adapting to. I think we've seen some behaviors starting to pop up that, almost I want to call it digital etiquette, if I can call it that. That's been, the dark side of using technology is that there's some new things that you are going to have to start dealing with that you're going to have to try and understand. And I think it's those things, it's how do we keep people safe? How do we enable them to work and make work visible? And the last one is, how do we as an organization also understand and make sure that we adapt to that darker side of technology, the loss of, I've spoken a lot about connection, but also that component around, I'm always on. I see your little green light goes on regardless of whether it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, I can phone you. How do we put those boundaries in place so that technology doesn't become the thing that drives our business, but that humans drive our business with technology enabling them? And I think that, call it human technology interface, and how we manage that. And interface is not a tech term in this context. It's almost the relationship between the two. I think that's fundamental for any organization considering and thinking about, the way of work for the future.
Sure. And I think had this been under normal circumstances, and we could see an audience full of people, because we're looking at both components from the employee perspective and the employer. We mentioned those sort of guidelines and parameters around when to be contacted and when not, and the dark side of technology. I can imagine there are a lot of employees in there, not in their heads in agreement. So just
maybe last comment maybe on that. I think we always talk about culture in the context of what are the unwritten rules in your organization that everybody knows but nobody talks about.
Yes.
I think in the virtual world you have to have conversations about those unwritten rules. What is okay and what can and can't happen. So I think if you don't have that conversation, the basis of expectation is not aligned. Sure. And it's those types of things, so some people, yes, they work late at night. I'm one of them, but that's a time that I feel my most productive. But that does not mean that I've got the right to email anybody else that late in the evening and expect a response immediately. And to make it clear, to my team, I'm not impressed if you email me back at 11:30. I'm asking you the question, why on earth are you working at this particular stage?
Yeah.
It's a small, silly example, but I think it's important in terms of the way that we think about practices and culture, especially going forward.
Okay, perfect. And I see Laura Jane, who heads up HR for Global Ec. I see that she's in agreement with us there as well, so that's good. So Dieter, just one final question before I invite Rob and Queen to come on camera is, what does the future world of work look like from a office, from a virtual perspective for Momentum Metropolitan? What does it look like, this new hybrid model?
Yeah, so I think, John, I think one day we're going to think back on COVID and say, and almost view it a little bit differently as a time that fundamentally changed the way we think about work and what work is. Yeah. And I think for Momentum Metropolitan, for us, we are having the conversation to say, what are some of the lessons that we can take out of COVID? How can we apply them going forward? And if we are now entering this hybrid workforce, what does that actually look like for us? And there's been a few things, that I think have come to light for us. The first one is we have to rethink around what is the purpose of an office. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not saying that let go of all your office space, but I think an office will become a place of connection and collaboration. It's no longer the place, where I go and I've got a desk and I sit down and I go there to go and work, because I think work will happen anyway. And
Sure.
I think flexibility is going to become currency, which means that, I think a lot of people will start looking at flexibility as the thing that they look for in an employer. So rethinking how we use office space.
Okay.
I think introducing it to something that we are talking about, the concept of a third space. Now, what does that mean? It means it makes absolutely no sense if I have to go to the office and one of my colleagues have to go to the office, but actually both of us live on the other side of town. What is the third space concept where we can actually get together, and what is the purpose of that? And then I think, definitely lastly, I think it is that component to say, how do we balance well-being of employees with productivity in terms of making sure we get there, and how do we align that towards the purpose that we want to achieve? And always making sure that our way of work is actually informed by our purpose as opposed to the other way around. And I think for us, that's important, rethinking how we work, making sure that our practices are sustainable, so not making short-term decisions only. And I think that's been an important lesson for us. In COVID, in crisis mode, you sometimes make, decisions that bite you a few months or years down the line, and balancing those types of things, because there's still a lot of good things that comes out of the traditional way of work that we have to just amend or adapt or evolve to be relevant in the new world. It's not like we're starting from scratch. It's more around those small evolutions over time, and to get better and better and better, and keep on learning about how we can improve that for ourselves going forward.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dieter. And I can see that there's a couple of questions coming into the chat, which you can either type some responses or we can touch on towards the end of our session. I found that very insightful, and I'm very grateful for your time here this morning. So thanks for sharing some of your views. And then Rob and Queen, I'm going to invite both of you to jump on camera and connect your audio as well. And Dieter, you're welcome to turn your camera off while we in quick conversation here. So welcome, Rob, and welcome, Queen. Let's check that the audio is good there.
Good stuff. Thanks, John.
Excellent. Great to have you both here.
Thank you, John.
So in the build-up to this conversation, we had a quick discussion around both the Oracle story, and maybe, Queen, we can start there. From the employer's perspective, Oracle's transition into going back to the office, and some of your views and stance there. And Rob, you can give us some of your perspective and views, and what you anticipate are some of the challenges in that transition as well.
Okay. Thank you, John, and thanks to Dieter. I think he spoke about very critical or very important elements around intentional connection. I think working from home, what has been a little bit of a challenge is really connecting to employees, because I'm one of the people who do what we call management by walkabout, or meaning that connecting with employees, going to their desk, or even intentionally talking to them on the corridors and all that. But as Dieter has already mentioned, working from home took away that part of really connecting with employees. And also we had to now look at how do we intentionally connect with employees. One, have coffee breaks via Zoom, coffee breaks. And another important part is also calling them, just calling a person, checking how they're doing and how are they surviving. And most especially those who have really contracted the COVID-19, calling them and their families as well to connect with them and just to check how they're doing. And another important part that we also looked at is around employee assistance program, because we realized a lot of employees were not coping. So we had sessions. We had almost around 6 sessions around how to really work in a mobile space, how to work from home and how to adapt from home. And as well as some those who were interested, we had some yoga sessions where employees did yoga, they've done meditation, and also looking at being present, looking at the issue of really focusing and as well as grounding themselves. And it's very important because Dieter already mentioned that some employees were not even coping working from home. Some were really struggling. But having that kind of balance, that's what we have really done to make sure that employees can cope working from home. And another thing that we have done over and above really giving them the tools, we allow them to come collect chairs from the office.
Okay.
Those wanted to have chairs and to be able to work from home.
Okay, yeah. I believe chiropractor and physio bills have gone through the roof recently, just from having bad posture, sitting on maybe a dining room chair or working off our bed or somewhere bizarre like that. So that's great that you accommodate that. And also like what you said about the intentionality and yoga sessions, mindfulness, peacefulness. It goes back to what Dieter was talking about earlier about the psychological safety. So it sounds like we are on almost the other side of the spectrum, where Momentum and Metropolitan are obviously in the process of guiding people back to work. Queen, we've heard from you earlier that it doesn't sound as though Oracle has any immediate plans of getting anybody back to the office, and you've obviously equipped your teams. But Rob, I'd love to hear some of your views on your experience thus far.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so I think in a role of his employee. So I keep making the joke that I want to get back to the office because I need a break.
Yeah.
Because I think, as employees, we all zoomed out. I found that sort of the boundaries, there's no more boundaries. So I made a decision after the first, I think it was a week after Easter, and I realized that I wasn't actually even going outside. I walked to my office early in the morning, and from my office, I walked to dinner. And I sort of complained, and my boss said, well, why don't you put a lunch hour in? And I try and do that. I block every day between 12 and 1, but very rarely do I get to use it as a lunch hour. Yeah. And to tie into the point that Dieter made, and a really, really good point, this whole issue of trust. When people worked from home before, it was changing of an office location. So if the team was at the office between 8 and 5, if I worked from home, I needed to be at 8 to 5 at my desk. Mm. And that's not what we're working in today. I think Dieter mentioned working late at night. And I think managers have to have this maturity to go and say, I'm going to manage your outputs, because working from home means kids need to get to the doctor, kids need to be picked up. I've got other things to do, but I'll get my job done. Don't worry about when. And I think this is causing the conflict, because I find more and more I'm sitting, and Oracle being an international company, often we have meetings at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening is when the guys in our counterparts in the States start work. So South African guys I'm working with 7 in the morning, American guys I'm working with 7 o'clock in the evening. When I was at the office, it was easier to manage. So it's this whole concept's got to change, that working from home is not just a change of location. It's a new culture coming within the organization. So to me, that's a very big challenge. And I just want to, the other point that Dieter made, which one of my execs who is from Lebanon, he makes a point of every meeting not starting, when people start the meeting, to say, stop, guys. Hi, everybody. How are you, John? How's your day going? And moving through the people. Because we all jump into this meeting and it's just starts straight away, and not that personalization that you would normally have, waiting for people to walk into the boardroom, getting the coffee, everybody's having their coffee. That's gone. And I think that's an important thing. This, we all people, we're social beings, and we may not be in the same room, but that doesn't detract from us actually following that sort of process of actually engaging with people. So, and then the last thought I had, and it was a strange thought I had, and I said to Queen, I'm speaking under anonymously here. So I was sitting on the veranda one of the lucky days I had lunch, and I'll be honest with you, I've worked from home for many years, and I got into the discipline of dressing for work. And so at 5 o'clock or whenever, when I finish work, I get changed into different clothing to create this disciplined break. Okay. But anyway, during the heatwave last week, I broke that rule and I put on shorts. And I was sitting on the veranda having my lunch, and I thought, what would my attitude be if I was phoned by somebody to say, Rob, we require you at a customer in an hour's time? How would I be feeling? And I thought, I'd be like, how do I get out of this? I'm like comfortable at home here. I'm in my shorts. Now I've got to go and get dressed and get in my car and travel. But that's my job. So we have to start bringing these sorts of things into our conversations. This working from home is not just the guy's not going to be in for the day, he's working from home. And this whole psyche around working from home, and organizations from an HR point of view need to look at this and say, our policies and procedures need to change.
Yes.
The organization at the heart is changing. This new way of work that we spoke about last year and the year before, coming down the line, the fourth industrial revolution, all that we spoke about. COVID brought it to our doorstep immediately.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're obviously making light of a serious situation, but I think often we don't take the psychological aspects into it, like something as simple as dress code, where, we'll be in a Zoom meeting with a smart shirt on and perhaps just wearing shorts underneath. But what does that generally do to us psychologically in terms of our productivity or performance? So thanks for touching on that, Rob. Queen and Rob, this is both for you. Oracle obviously being a real powerhouse of technology and systems. I'm going to assume that moving everybody from a physical office environment into a virtual or working from home scenario probably didn't pose as many challenges as sort of traditional organizations. So maybe you can speak to some of those platforms and resources and tools that were at your disposal to have that safe transition. Maybe we can start with you, Queen.
It was very easy, John, because if I look at it, all Oracle employees, they've got the tools, which means they've got their laptops, they've got the workflow. If I need to approve anything, any appointment or anything that needs to happen through the system, the line managers will put it onto the system. I'll get a workflow. I'll approve. Whether I approve 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the evening, everything will be approved. And we found that it was so easy for our employees to adapt to such an extent that those who like to focus or those who like to really work focusing, for example, our developers, they also even said they don't want to go back to the office. They asked us to close the office in Cape Town because they've got all the resources and all the workflow. Our HCM system works much brilliantly, whereby everything that we need to approve on the system or work remotely works brilliantly. Even if you want to make any claims, I think I was talking to Rob before we started this session where he was talking about printing documents and all that. I said, but Rob, you can just claim on the system and everything will be approved. You don't even have to go back to the office.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from speaking broadly and from an Oracle point of view, what Oracle we did is we created we've got what we call a customer connect, where we've got 50,000 users connected in the HR space. Is we created a COVID-19 forum where our customers could all collaborate, sort of what we're doing today. And one of the things that came out from our customers is, and in the Oracle HCM solution, we've got an onboarding process. And the customers started using that to onboard employees on a return to work. And what they were then able to do with that is every employee had to go through an onboarding process to return to the office. What that ensured was that HR could ensure people reviewed safety protocols, understood what it means coming back to work, if there was any new training collateral, and they could start recording it and measuring it. So it became a huge, big advantage. Because an employee could at home say, well, I need to view this video on when I get to the office, one person in the lift at a time, sanitizing at different stages. So it really helped organizations start bringing their employees back in. And through the system, made it automated that everybody had to go through onboarding again. And that really, really helped from that perspective. And then we also provided a whole platform. Our developers were quite sharp, actually. They created a whole COVID-19 dashboard and reporting. So anything that actually happened in the organization around COVID could be tracked and traced. So if I was at the office yesterday and today I tested positive, Queen would know to initiate actions that I was in boardroom 1, 2, and 3, that they had to be properly deeply sanitized before used again. And, that based on my age, Queen could send me a message saying, Rob, your age group's high risk. You must not come back to the office. So all of that started helping organizations being proactive in managing this pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Thanks. That's really interesting. Maybe you could share some additional pointers just in terms of, and you obviously don't need to mention organization names, but perhaps where you found partners and companies that were in quite a tricky or a difficult situation, and then how you were able to assist them with this transition back to work. And then I'm going to come to you next, Queen.
Okay, so what Oracle did is basically within our solution we have a full health and safety module. So what Oracle then said to every customer, it's yours to use with no cost. Until the pandemic ends, it's yours to use. And then what Oracle did is we went to our partner network, so the big 5 and the other big consulting houses, and they all also committed to actually helping customers implement that module at no cost. So it is really we put our skin in the game to say, you need this module, but we're not going to force you to buy it and take advantage. It's there for you to use. and we'll provide you with the collateral. So all the new reporting, the dashboarding, our customers could download it. So we had many organizations started using that. I think in the uptake in the first couple of weeks, we had over 50 organizations went live on that. So there was a huge uptake from that perspective. And because our solution is mobile, one advantage was that an employee could actually go on their mobile and say, I think I've got COVID, report it immediately. So to keep the stats up to date in real time, because to manage the impact of COVID, because COVID's not only about me not being at work, it's my skill set not being available for the organization. So saying, well, if Rob's not at work, which other employees could actually potentially do their job? And
Yes.
that's actually bring them on board. So there was a whole thing around, we connected into the managing of talent, because me being at work, it's a bigger impact than just being on sick leave.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you, Rob. So we've obviously heard from the technological side. Queen, I'm interested to hear from you. Obviously, earlier in our conversation, Dieter shared some tips from an HR executive's perspective about how we can make this transition back to the office a little bit smoother. What are some of the tips that you can impart and leave with us on this journey about how we can transition a bit easier?
I think one thing that Dieter mentioned, I think you also highlighted, is issues around trust. Definitely trusting our employees. Secondly, making sure that there's preparations around facilities. I went to the office 2 weeks back just to check what's going on, and also to check whether there's sanitizers, to check the distancing in the office. That is very critical. And also the percentage of employees who have to come back to the office, looking at least around 25 to 30% of employees who can come back, as well as preparing the line managers on how to rotate. The employees can rotate coming back into the office, and also making sure that their safety. I think employee safety comes first, as well as making sure if they're going to see customers, the customers' safety also comes first. So having that kind of balance on making sure that those who are coming back to the office, they can still work from home, but at the same time, they can still also have a third-party kind of work where they can still meet outside the work environment. I think those are very critical, because we need to look at balancing the facilities, balancing employees' well-being from a health point of view, as well as balancing that kind of safety when employees going back to the office, and also making sure that there's not that excitement of everyone flocking in, because we have not seen each other for a very long time. So it can be very easy to really flock into the office and wanting to give each other hugs, but really to follow the protocol around the COVID-19 restrictions.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Queen. I was going to start the Q&A section now, but I see we've received a couple of comments in the chat, and I know that this is an area we have some expertise on, Queen. So Nazneen Adam was asking about how recruitment had changed, and I see a couple of other people have latched onto that conversation. And I know that this is something that you've been actively during the COVID, DC, during Corona. So could you share some tips on how you were able to achieve that, and then we'll enter into Q&A?
Yes, the recruitment process really has changed a lot, where all the meetings or the interviews are done online. The assessments are also done online. And I think with Oracle, we've been very brilliant when it comes to the recruitment process, because everything is done seamlessly online, from advertising, for people applying, for people receiving the offers. They also receive the offer online. They also accept by just clicking a button online as well, when they accept the offer, and receiving all that kind of documentation. So it has been well done. And also looking at the onboarding has been exceptional. We courier the laptops as well, yes, because when we know the person is starting, we courier the laptops, everything, and we also support them with someone sitting somewhere, most especially to connect the laptops and all that. So it has been an interesting journey, and it also a journey where it shows that, that human-to-human connection, we need it, but sometimes we don't need it. We can also do everything remotely.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Queen. So I see we've had a couple of messages come in the chat, and Dieter, you're welcome to jump back on camera as well. And remember just to connect your mic so that we can hear from you as well. So we received a couple of questions in the build up to this, and also obviously on our chat today. So one that I'd like to kick off with, and we can do fastest finger on the buzzer first here. So the first question is around, and or actually maybe Dieter, this is one directed at you, because we had Vivian, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Makanaga, who is asking about a good rotation schedule in terms of getting staff back to work. So you spoke about who goes back to work, why, what is the purpose, how did we come to that decision?
Sure. So maybe a few comments on that. I think, we run an organization that we try and empower business units as much as possible and try and empower teams to a large extent. So I think I want to make 2 points on that. First one is, don't implement practices or procedures that contradict your culture. So in our environment that, we believe that BUs have to make the decisions that's going to work for them, and teams need to be empowered to do so as well. Trying to then implement, can I call them almost a centralized rostering schedule is a recipe for disaster in our environment. So I think the considerations is what will work here, and what are the principles again, that we would consider when we think about things like rotation. So things like safety, things like protocol that I think, Queen and Rob also spoke to as well. And then I think the third question is always a good one pertaining to the fact, why are you implementing rotation? What is it that you want to achieve that you can't achieve through a new virtual way of work? What is that specific intention behind it? Is it for, collaboration or social connection, or the human touch or the human element that you want to include in the workforce? But be clear around those things, empower people to make the calls, give them guidelines around what they can and can't do to make sure that we adhere to those principles, and then monitor and adapt over time. Because I think that's the critical thing. We won't get it right first time, and we will make mistakes, but let's make sure that we learn from them and move forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Victoria Hawkins also asked a question, and I'm just going to paraphrase or summarize it. But you're saying that currently they have a 50-50 split between employees at work and employees working from home. And there's obviously significant impacts that's going to have on things like company culture, and maybe even leading towards a bit of resentment between you get to work from home and I have to work in the office. So maybe we can start with Queen and Rob, your views and sentiment, or Queen or Rob, your sentiments and views around there, and then we'll come to you, Peter.
Yeah. So I think, Dieter made the point, and we've all referred to it, is the trust issue.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's not a 50-50 number. So, there are certain jobs that possibly require being at the office, maybe, but people could work from home. And I think, Dieter makes the valid point on why am I doing something? To do it for the sake of doing it, you're going to create the environment of why am I at the office and other people aren't. That's why I spoke about this the culture, the whole, the meat of the organization. The organization look at that and say, how are we going to operate in future? Yeah. And then when you look at your leadership, that trust issue's got to come in. I know when I managed big teams before, and working from home was a privilege, I used to say certain people can work from home, certain people can't. And then nothing to do with the job, it had to do with personality. If you're not a disciplined person, it's more and more difficult to work at home. I think COVID has helped people through this because they had no choice. And a lot of people a lot more can work from home, I believe, than before. Yes. So it's got to be around, it shouldn't be around, you've got to be at the office and you needn't. People don't accept it any longer because for the last 6 months I had to be at home and I did my job. So now you come to an argument with me and say, why I can't be at home? So I think leadership, the role of leadership is going to be really strong in this, and the trust issue is going to come in. Queen, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, and I think I agree with I agree with Rob. Another important part is also the role. I mentioned earlier on that we've got developers in Oracle, and they're based in Cape Town. So we allowed the developers to work from home because of the level of work they do, the intensity of focus. They don't need to be disturbed. They need to focus. I think 80% of their role is more around working intensively as well as using the mind or using the brain. So you might have different kind of roles. Some employees who are more salespeople might want that interaction. They might need that kind of collaboration. They might need to be around other people. So it depends on the different roles. And if leaders, as Rob already mentioned, it's all about leadership and explaining why certain certain groups are at home and why certain groups are working from the office, and the kind of collaboration that is needed for the entire organization, as well as the culture. I think Dita spoke about the organizational culture that needs to be instilled within the entire organization.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob and Queen. Anything you'd add to that, Dita?
No, I think spot on. I think it is. We asked the question around, firstly, what is the work? So that refers to the comment around the role. Who is the person doing the work? Because context and situation also has to influence that conversation. And I think a third one maybe to add was around, treating people fairly does not mean we treat everybody exactly the same. Now, what I mean by that particular comment is, there will be certain considerations based on who the individual is and what the work is that needs to happen. But be transparent about that so that people understand why we make certain decisions pertaining to some coming back, some people working remotely, I think as part of those different elements. Because I think if people don't understand, perceptions are then made around, and I think, we've used the word trust a lot, that, oh, you don't trust me, that's why I have to come in, but person X doesn't. And it refers back to my previous point, what are the unwritten rules, that we put in place, and let's be transparent about those, because context, I think, is super important. I think that's something that we've learned a lot over the past few months, and situation, and make sure that those two elements are considered in your approach and you're transparent about it.
Perfect. Thanks, Dita. I see we've got about 3 minutes remaining, and the next question is one we could host an entire webinar on. A couple of people asked us both in the build-up to the webinar, so Persistence Monkhadi asked about this, and I also saw comments in the chat earlier. Now, we've touched on this very briefly, so if you can just give a 10,000-foot view or a very high-level overview of how change management processes have changed for you and how they need to still change to accommodate this new way of work. So, Queen, let's start with you, and we'll come to you next, Peter.
Change management process is critical. I always talk about seasons to say that there's always seasons in life. What is critical or what is very important is how we adapt to those changes and to those seasons, and how we become flexible. And I would encourage everyone to really adapt to different seasons in life, in the work environment, and everything that we do.
Thanks. Rob, anything you'd add?
No, look, I think, change management, it's all around communication. To me, that's key. And I think Dita's alluded a couple of times, and having to do that is, engaging with people, explaining to people, keeping people informed. One of the comments in the chat was, what effort are organizations making about people who are infected with COVID? Does the organization reaching out to those people, to their family for assistance? Do they feel isolated? So this big change we've gone through was forced on us, and it's going to happen. It's going to be with us for a while. And organizations who haven't focused on this, they have still time to actually take a step back and engage with the employees now on what is the way forward. Because I think a lot of people are feeling nervous. Working from home, I don't know, we know job situation, job security. Before I could stand at the water cooler and speak to my friends about that.
Yeah.
Now I don't speak to anybody about it. So it's one of the stresses that were highlighted in research, is the stress that employees are going through because they're unable to go and have these discussions with people where people can allay their fears.
100%. Yeah, thanks, Rob. And Dita,
I think maybe to add to that, maybe to definitely agree with Queen as well. I think it is about seasons. I think it's also around a component that stop trying to manage change, just navigate it. And you will only navigate change if you let go of control. I think you sound in terms of the principles that you want to put down around who you want to be and how you want to do it. And ultimately, I think empower people to be able to be part of the change that is coming, because we're all going through this together at the same time. And I think we're going to have to learn how to do that together. And I think, we like to use the term change navigation as opposed to change management, because we believe, and Queen mentioned that, that adaptability, if we can't learn how to navigate as the road changes, we believe we're dead in the water, and we can only do so if we empower the people to make the calls they need to make.
100%. So one final question here, and you can answer with a hand gesture. So back to the office, not or hybrid. Thanks, Queen. Dita and Rob. Perfect.
Hybrid. Definitely hybrid.
Awesome. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the three of you for your time this morning and imparting some of your knowledge with the CHRO community. Really, really appreciate it. There were lots of questions that were asked in the chat, which we will be getting your responses to. So Peter, Rob, and Queen, I'll be sending you a follow-up email just with some of those questions if you can give us some responses, and we'll be sure to reach out to everyone. And then Rob, Peter, and Queen, if I could ask you just to turn your cameras off for a second, please. I just want to inform everybody of the upcoming webinars that we are going to be hosting. So we can see this is the one we hosted here this morning. Next week, on the 11th of November, one of the CHRO community partners, Compliance Online, is presenting a really interesting workshop around policy perfection. So we've spoken a lot today about how things have changed, how we need to implement. So if you attend next week, you'll learn how to, number one, write a policy that matters and that people can actually understand. And most importantly, how you can actually measure that that has been implemented or action. Then you'll also notice the following day, we've got some of your friends here at DITA. So we've got a workshop in partnership with Momentum Corporate, and it's all about retaining your staff performance. We know that this is a huge concern at the moment for us as well. So I would like to take another opportunity to thank our panelists for their time here this morning. And most importantly, thank you to the CHRO community. We really value and appreciate your ongoing support. And we're looking forward to seeing you in upcoming sessions. You'll also notice in the chat, I've just posted a link where you can register for some of our upcoming webinars as well. And 2 hours after this webinar, you should receive a recording of it. So if you'd like to share that with any friends, colleagues, or peers, you're welcome to do so as well. So thank you all for being here this morning, and have a great day further. Stay safe. Ciao for now.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Dieter. Cheers.